Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome to our webcast of our Saturday morning class on Shankaracharya's Atma Bodha. We continue in the section on the fruits of self-knowledge, verses 39 through 47. We have just verse 47 to discuss. And in previous class, we discussed how it's important to understand what the nature of the goal is. If the nature of the goal is not clear, our efforts in spiritual life will be misdirected. And this happens to be a very common problem, so we will definitely want to avoid it. And we can avoid it very easily by being clear about the goal. And here in verse 47, Shankaracharya describes the culmination of one's process of spiritual growth using the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, a process that culminates in Sarvatma Bhava. Use that word at the end of the last class. Sarva Atma Bhava, the bhava, the state or condition of being the Atma, the self of Sarva, all. And that'll actually be described, that Sarvatma Bhava will be described nicely in this verse, so we'll let Shankaracharya explain it. Repeat after me. Atma Vedam Jagat Sarvam, Atma Vedam Jagat Sarvam, Atmanonyanna Vidyate, Atmanonyanna Vidyate, Mrido yadvadghatadini, Mrido yadvadghatadini, Swatmanam sarvamikshate, Swatmanam sarvamikshate. In the first line, Atma eva idam jagat sarvam. By the way, if you see the word Vedam, there's no word Veda in this verse. We have this a feature of the Sanskrit language is called sandhi, which means sandhi means joining, union. When two words or parts of words come together, the letters can combine. So here we have the word eva followed by idam. Eva plus idam is a Vedam. So there's no word Veda. Okay. Atma eva. Atma alone. Idam jagat sarvam is idam sarvam. All this jagat, the world. The entire world, idam sarvam jagat, this entire world is Atma eva. Atma alone. Remember, Atma is the word we use for your true self, your inner nature, consciousness, Satchidananda Atma. That consciousness, which most people think of as being so ordinary, that consciousness, as we've discussed in some length, that consciousness is non-different from Brahman, the fabric of existence, that because of which everything exists. So consciousness, can't really call it your consciousness. We'll just call it consciousness. Can't call it your consciousness because there's nothing that divides or separates your consciousness from my consciousness or anything else. And here the vision is vaster than that. Atma, consciousness, is not simply your ordinary experiential consciousness, but rather that consciousness is the underlying substratum because of which everything exists. And further, Atmanaha Anyat, other than that Atma, na vidyate, nothing else exists other than Atma. The only thing that exists is Atma, consciousness, Satchidananda Atma, and because that consciousness is the underlying reality because of which the cosmos exists, there's nothing except Atma. Atma, like the clay, is the underlying substratum because of which this pot exists. In the same way, Atma, consciousness, is the underlying reality because of which the universe exists. Therefore, Atmanaha Anyat, other than Atma, na vidyate, nothing else exists. This is the vision of the enlightened person. In fact, the pot metaphor comes right here. Mridaha yadvat, in the third line, yadvat, just like. Mridaha, and you have to bring the words from the prior line. Anyat na vidyate, anyat. Mridaha anyat, other than clay, back to our pot. Mridaha anyat, other than clay, gatadini na vidyate. Vidyante. We'll have to change the number here. I'm being fussy with the Sanskrit. So the metaphor, the drishtanta, comes in the third line. Just like other than clay, if suppose I had not just one pot, but a huge pile of pots. So no matter if you have one pot or 1,000 pots or 1,000,000 pots, they're nothing but clay. 1,000,000 pots are nothing but clay. In the same way, everything that exists in the universe, including all the stars and planets and galaxies, Atmanaha anyat na vidyate, nothing out there in the universe exists which is separate from Atma, which is different from Atma, which is other than Atma. This is the vision of the enlightened person. By the way, the enlightened person is our next topic. We'll see in just a moment. And that, the final line says, the vision of that enlightened person, ikshate, that enlightened person is one, ikshate, who sees, literally sees, but it means understands. Who understands what? Sarvam, everything, is swa atmanam, one's own self. The enlightened person is one who ikshate, sees, sarvam, everything, the entire universe, including you and me, the chair on which I sit, everything. Sab kuch, as you say. Everything is seen as swatmanam, one's own self. And this indeed is the Sarvatma Bhava I mentioned in the introduction, we discussed in the end of the prior class, and that is the vision of the enlightened person, the consciousness, which is my essential nature, is the underlying reality because of which everything exists. Therefore, everything is that Atma, that consciousness, which is my essential nature. This is Sarvatma Bhava. An important point here before we finish this topic is that Sarvatma Bhava is a beautiful expression. The bhava, the state or existence, the state of being the Atma, the self of Sarva, all. The state of being the self, the essence of all, Sarvatma Bhava. Now, bhava, the word bhava is often used to describe like a feeling or an emotion. But it's really important to point out here that here, Sarvatma Bhava is not an experience. An enlightened person still experiences having an individual body. This body, in terms of experience, is absolutely different from the chair in which I'm sitting in. This body is different from this text. This body is different from everything. So the enlightened person's experience is, I won't say normal, because normal experience is full of suffering and conflict and grief and all of these problems. So that's normal experience. The enlightened person is not normal in that regard, but in other respects, the enlightened person experiences himself or herself, experiences body, mind, and senses not unlike the way you experience your body, your mind, and your senses. So Sarvatma Bhava is not an experience. Sarvatma Bhava is a vision of reality, an understanding of reality, an understanding in which you recognize the non-separateness of everything that exists from yourself. Everything is a manifestation of the consciousness which is your true nature. This is Sarvatma Bhava. It's a matter of understanding. It's not some kind of unique experience. So, with that verse, we have concluded the subject matter, the fruits of self-knowledge. We're now about to begin the next subject matter, starting with verse 48, the enlightened person. Now, the word used by Shankaracharya, we'll see it at the beginning of verse 48. The word he uses for the enlightened person is Jivan Mukta, and we should understand that word before we dive into this next topic. Jivan Mukta is one who is Mukta, freed, liberated, Jivan, even while living. And this word is to distinguish it from another condition called one who is Videha Mukta. Videha Mukta is one who is Mukta, freed, Videha, in the absence of the body. Let me change the words from Jivan Mukta, the person, to Jivan Mukti, the state. So let's compare the state of Jivan Mukti, liberated while alive, and compare it to Videha Mukti, liberated after dropping the body, after one's death. Many traditions focus exclusively on Videha Mukti. Especially devotional traditions will focus on Videha Mukti, devotional Hindu traditions. Even, I suppose, biblical religions, in some way, they speak of going to heaven. Now, definitely going to heaven is different than the way we envision liberation. But the point is, for the biblical traditions, the ultimate goal is reached after you die. In going to heaven, you can only attain after you die. In the same way, for many devotional Hindu traditions, the goal is to get to some kind of loka, heaven, to be with Bhagavan, to be merged with Bhagavan, to be in Bhagavan's presence. There are so many different ways to describe that condition. But in all those cases, whether you are salokya, is the technical terms they use, salokya, you are in the same realm as God, Ishvara, or sayujya, and there are four, and I can't remember all four. Sayujya, samipya is near, sayujya, merged with. So they have these technical terms to describe the goal, but all of these goals are reached only when you die, only when you drop the body. So those would be examples of Videha Mukti. Mukti, liberation, which is gained Videha, in the absence of a physical body after you die. So we then make a distinction, very important distinction, between Videha Mukti and Jivan Mukti, which is what Shankaracharya is going to explain here. Jivan Mukti, to be enlightened while still alive. And this is perhaps one of the unique teachings of Advaita Vedanta, that Advaita Vedanta puts the focus on enjoying freedom here and now, even in the presence of your physical body. Now, if you ask, well, how can I be liberated while I still have a physical body? The physical body will always have all kinds of problems, and the number of problems will only grow as we grow older. Also, a mind which has all kinds of problems, sense organs which have all kinds of problems. Many people question, how is it even possible to be liberated as long as you're stuck, so to speak, excuse me, stuck in this old, decrepit and decaying body? You can answer that based on all of our prior classes. You can easily answer that. The problems of the body belong to the body, not to the conscious being you. The problems of the mind belong to the mind, not to you, the conscious being, Satchidananda Atma. The problems of the sense organs, of the prana, of everything else, none of these problems belong to you. Shuddha Chaitanya, pure consciousness. So this is the beautiful teaching of Advaita Vedanta, which clearly establishes that the goal is not something you have to wait to die to achieve. And anything you have to wait to die to achieve it, it becomes a matter of belief, does it not? How do you know? How do you know that after you die, you're going to go to Goloka Vrindavan, the term that some Vaishnava traditions use to describe the realm of Sri Krishna. And they believe strongly that if you are purified of all your sins in this life, when you die, you go to this Goloka Vrindavan. You get to hang out with Sri Krishna, hang out, so to speak. How do you know? It's a matter of belief. There's no possible way of validating that here and now in this life. This point really distinguishes Advaita Vedanta because it teaches a state of freedom, mukti, a state of freedom that you can gain, jivan, while you're living, and therefore it can be verified here and now in this lifetime. It is absolutely not a matter of belief. This is Jivan Mukti, and it's the goal of Advaita Vedanta, but you should know that many other Hindu traditions, and certainly all non-Hindu traditions, don't accept this Jivan Mukti at all. On the other hand, in Advaita Vedanta, it's presented not as a matter of belief. It's presented as a goal that you can pursue, you can gain for yourself, and having gained it, you verify it, you validate it in terms of your own experience. This is what Advaita Vedanta teaches, and here Shankara is going to teach then in the next sequence of verses, 48 to 52, he's going to teach the nature of the enlightened person, the nature of one who is Jivan Muktaha, one who is liberated while alive. Jivan Muktastu tad vidwan, Jivan Muktastu tad vidwan, Purvo Padigunans Tyajet, Purvo Padigunans Tyajet, Satchidananda Rupatvat, Satchidananda Rupatvat, Bhaved Brahmarakitavata, Bhaved Brahmarakitavata. So the word to in the middle of the first line is a word that distinguishes, like but. But Jivan Muktaha, the one who is liberated while alive, the one who is Tad Vidwan, the one who is Vidwan, one who knows. The one who knows what? Tat. The pronoun tat refers to Brahman, truth, reality. So Tad Vidwan, the one who knows that reality, that's Brahman, we call Atma, the one who is enlightened, that enlightened person is Jivan Muktaha, liberated while alive. So that person liberated while alive. How can you be liberated, as I said before, when you're stuck with your body? Shankara explains, and the certain second line, he says, Tyajait, that person abandons. Abandons what? Purva upadhi gunan. That person abandons the gunas, the qualities associated with purva upadhi. Upadhi, we've seen that technical term in so many previous classes. Loosely speaking, it refers to your body, to your mind, to your senses. So, and purva here in the sense that before enlightenment, purva means before. Before enlightenment, you identified yourself with your body, mind, and senses. So this is my body is identification. If it's my body, then whatever happens to this body affects me. But an enlightened person will say, not my body, although they could use the expression just casually, but for an enlightened person, there's no sense of possession with regard to the body. It's just a thing. Just like this paper is a thing, just like this chair is a thing, the body is one more thing. And looking upon the body, mind, and senses as just one more thing, there's no identification with it. Tyajait. The person gives up identification with the gunas, the attributes which belong to the body, mind, and senses, which means when the body, mind, or senses have problems, the problems belong to the body, mind, and senses. As we said before, the problems do not belong to you, the enlightened person, Satchidananda Atma consciousness. Why? How does that take place? Satchidananda Rupa Twat, in the third line. Because the enlightened person, Satchidananda Rupa, is one whose Rupa, whose form, whose true nature is Satchidananda. We've seen these words, I don't need to explain them. You know, a nice way of explaining this is a shift of identification. Prior to enlightenment, a person naturally identifies with the body, mind, and senses. After identification, it's not merely that identification with the body, mind, and senses is removed, but better to say identification is shifted. Identification is shifted away from the body, mind, and senses towards the true self, Satchidananda. So it's not really the destruction of identification as much as it is re-identification or correct identification. Dropping the false identification with the body, mind, and senses and becoming identified with your true nature. Satchidananda, Chit, consciousness, which is Sat, unborn, uncreated, unchanging, and which is Ananda, limitless, boundaryless, full, and complete. So identification is shifted away from the body, mind, and senses, shifted toward Satchidananda Atma. So it's this shift of identification which is brought about through Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. And we could say that, which we've discussed in great length in prior classes. Here, I'm going to introduce the last line, which is a little problematic, as you'll see in just a moment. The last line kind of talks about nididhyasana. Nididhyasana, Vedanta contemplation, was a prior topic in our text. And here, how does one fully shift that identification? If you remember that lion story, I'm not going to retell that long story, but the lion story described how the shift of identification, the lion was identified as being a lamb, and to shift his identification from being a lamb to being a lion took time and the practice which we're calling nididhyasana, Vedanta contemplation. This shift of identification depends on nididhyasana. And this last line, in a very odd way, describes that process of nididhyasana, the nididhyasana which brings about this shift of identification. Shankara uses a strange metaphor, drishtanta, bhavet. Bhavet, the enlightened person, bhavet, becomes like brahmara kitavat. Those are just two words which will take half an hour to explain. Not half an hour, but it'll take a few minutes to explain. That vat affix means like. Like a kita. Kita can mean any insect. Here it's referring to the larva of a particular insect. And brahmara, you might know as a bee or wasp. We'll call it a wasp. And we'll call it a wasp because this has been studied quite a bit by scientists who have observed that apparently there's a particular kind of wasp which will take the larvae of another kind of insect. So the wasp is relatively large compared to these small larvae. So the wasps will take the larvae into their nest. And then the female wasps will implant fertilized eggs inside of the larvae. We have to understand, we won't understand this metaphor without going through this. So look at this. The female wasps implant a fertilized egg inside the larvae. The larvae, I suppose, gives it a very fertile environment for this fertilized egg to grow, to mature. And of course, when the egg is grown or matured, what emerges from the larvae is a wasp. Now, it's not a wasp larvae. It's a larvae that the wasps stole, as it were, from some other insect. It's the larvae of another insect brought into the nest, and from that larvae emerges a wasp. Now, this is a little complicated, and it wasn't properly understood in Shankaracharya's time. I guess in his time, they didn't have a lot of scientific research and a lot of really careful, detailed observation. So what in Shankara's time, what they observed was this larvae was repeatedly stung by wasps. That wasn't really stung. It was the female wasp implanting their egg, but in ancient times, they couldn't understand what was going on. So they thought that the larvae was being stung by the wasps. Being stung by the wasps, they presumed, in this pre-scientific time, they presumed that the wasp, the larvae, which is a living thing, that the larvae must have become very much afraid of these wasps. And you know, whatever we're afraid of draws our attention. If you're driving down the road and somebody is near you, is driving wildly and erratic, that captures your attention, you're afraid of being hit by the other car, you pay extra attention to whatever makes you afraid. So look at this. The larvae being stung by these wasps was very much afraid of the wasps. So the larvae's attention was constantly fixed on the wasps, and in their minds, in their pre-scientific worldview, they thought that because the larvae's mind was so fixated on the wasps, the larvae was transformed into a wasp. We know that's not true today, but in ancient times, that's exactly how they thought. The poor larvae being stung by these wasps was very much afraid of them. The mind was always fixated on the wasps, and that fixation of the mind, which represents nididhyasana, resulted in the transformation of the larvae into a wasp. Now, the point of the drishtanta doesn't depend on their idea of wasps being and larvae being correct. That it's a trivial point. They didn't understand properly. It doesn't matter. What matters to us, the essence of the metaphor, is by having your mind constantly fixed on truth, on reality, on the truth that your true nature is Satchidananda Atma, which happens to be the underlying reality because of which the cosmos exists. When your attention, your mind, is fixated on that truth, when you practice a lot of nididhyasana and contemplate and reflect upon that truth again and again, day after day, you become that which you meditate on. Famous statement, Brahmavit Brahma Bhavati. One who knows Brahman becomes Brahman. Now, becomes not in the sense of transformation, and that's the shortcoming of this metaphor. There is a process of transformation suggested in this metaphor. There is no process of transformation here, because you already are Brahman. Your true nature already is Satchidananda Atma. The transformation that's brought about through the practice of nididhyasana, there is a transformation. Watch this. Through nididhyasana, there is a transformation, but it's not a transformation of your true nature. Your true nature is not going to change. It's not going to be transformed at all. What gets transformed is your mind, your thinking. In particular, the transformation, as I said before, is a shift of identification. That's a transformation, where your identification shifts away from being a body, mind, and sense complex, and that your identification is shifted to being fully identified as being Satchidananda Atma. So that shift of identification is the transformation through the practice of nididhyasana, which is what is strangely described in this metaphor in the last line. Okay, enough. Let's proceed. Tirtva moharnavam hatva, tirtva moharnavam hatva, ragadveshadi rakshasan, ragadveshadi rakshasan, yogi shanti samayukta, yogi shanti samayukta, atma ramo virajate, atma ramo virajate. Tirtva, having crossed, moha arnavam, the arnava, the ocean of moha, delusion, the delusion that causes suffering. This common expression, moharnava, the the ocean of worldly suffering, the ocean of delusion. The commentator makes a point of explaining why the metaphor is that of an ocean. A pond, you can see to the other side. Even a big lake, you can often see to the other side. You can't see to the other side of the ocean. It's vast. In terms of what you see, it looks limitless. We know it has a limit, but in terms of your experience, the ocean is limitless. So therefore, moharnavam, this limitless ocean of delusion and worldly suffering. Now, before we go through the verse, it's actually like an extended metaphor. An extended metaphor, perhaps, to Sri Rama and the story of the Ramayana. So you know that Rama had to cross the ocean to get to Lanka. So the demon, I don't need to remind you of the story, but the demon Ravana had kidnapped his wife, Sita, and held her captive on the island of Lanka, modern Sri Lanka. And for Rama to reach Sri Lanka, he had to cross the ocean. So the metaphor, extended metaphor begins, Tirtva moharnavam. Just as Rama had to cross the ocean to reach Lanka, in the same way, you have to cross the ocean of suffering. How did Rama reach Lanka? Remember, they built a bridge. So we need to build a bridge to cross the ocean of suffering. That bridge is built with the teachings of Vedanta. All of the prakriyas, the various teaching methodologies we employ, all of them put together comprise kind of a bridge on which you can walk, a bridge which can take you to your destination. Then, hatva, the metaphor continues, having killed raga dvesha rakshasan, having killed the rakshasas, the demons which are raga, passion, and dvesha, aversion, so attraction and aversion, so adi, etc. So all of our problems are like rakshasas. Raga and dvesha are like the main rakshasas. So the main rakshasas, Rama had to defeat Ravana. So here, you have to defeat the rakshasas, which are raga, attraction, and dvesha, aversion. So this is a metaphor. Then what? Then so having crossed the ocean of delusion, having defeated the demons of raga and dvesha, then what? Yogi, that practitioner of yoga, the yoga of Vedanta, that seeker of spiritual wisdom who has gained enlightenment, that one becomes shanti samayuktaha. Samayukta, joined with shanti, peace. That person becomes endowed with peace. Look at the metaphor. When Rama went to Lanka, he became reunited with Sita. Here, Sita in the metaphor represents Shanti in this verse. So, having crossed the ocean of delusion, having defeated the demons of raga and dvesha, attraction and aversion, then what? Shanti samyuktaha. One gains shanti. Just like Rama regained Sita, in the same way you gain shanti. Now there's a trick here. And the trick is shown in the last line. Something very surprising. So Rama regained Sita. His problems were solved. He had to regain Sita. But look where this ends. Shankara says, Atma Ramaha Virajate. Atma, aramaha. By the way, the use of the word Rama here is very intentional. It's a pun. So Rama, both as Sri Rama of the Ramayana, but here arama is to enjoy. Ram is a verbal root, which means to enjoy, to revel. So here the noun comes arama, enjoyment. Atma arama, enjoyment of Atma, oneself. Atma arama, the yogi, in the prior line, the yogi is the one who has crossed the ocean of suffering. The yogi is one who has defeated the demons of raga and dvesha. The yogi is one who has regained shanti. And that yogi is Atma Ramaha. That yogi revels in himself. Virajate. He shines. He glows. He enjoys himself. He enjoys himself. Look at this. Rama regains Sita, and the sense of contentment Rama feels is not external in Sita. What he feels, the contentment, having completed this great task, the contentment he feels is not outside of himself in Sita. The contentment he feels is inside of himself. So even Sita is not the object of contentment or source of contentment, better expression. Rama regains Sita, but Sita is not the source of contentment. The source of contentment is within. That's why Shankara says here, Atma aramaha, you revel in yourself. So it's nice kind of interpretation or application of the story of the Ramayana. The irony, of course, is, and we've talked about this quite a while ago, and that is we start off our lives looking for contentment and peace in countless activities and external things, and we discover after a long time that the true source of that contentment and peace that we've been looking for everywhere, the true source is within. Before we finish this term, Atma Rama, makes me think about a story told by Swami Chinmayananda, whom you might know as my Parama Guru. My Guru's Guru was Swami Chinmayananda, and he loved to tell this story. A story about someone who goes on a long pilgrimage, a long yatra. And in that yatra, the yatra represents seeking. Just like you were seeking happiness and contentment through worldly activities, just like Rama was seeking Sita on the island of Lanka. In the same way here, the Chinmayananda story is that a person is on a yatra. That yatra pilgrimage represents seeking. It's a long journey. That long journey culminates in reaching a special temple. So imagine this pilgrim, yatri, his pilgrim. So this pilgrim has traveled for days or weeks on foot and finally has reached the sacred temple. And this yatri enters the sacred temple and reaches the altar inside the sacred temple and sees the deity on the altar in the sacred temple after traveling so far. And then what does the yatri do? He closes his eyes. That's interesting. After making so much effort to reach this temple and stand before God's form on the altar, this pilgrim closes his eyes. Why? You get it. The true source of contentment and peace for the pilgrim is not standing on the altar. It's within. This whole Vedantic process of inquiry leads you to appreciate that what is the ultimate source of contentment, peace, joy, and happiness lies within. One who has discovered that is Atma Rama. That person is Arama, one who revels Atma in oneself. All right. Nice. Bahya nitya sukha saktim. Bahya nitya sukha saktim. Hitvatma sukha nirvritaha. Hitvatma sukha nirvritaha. Ghatastha deepavat swastaha. Ghatastha deepavat swastaha. Swantareva prakashate. Swantareva prakashate. Start in the second line. Hitva. Having given up. Having rejected. Having rejected what? Back up to the first line. Having rejected asaktim. Asakti, often translated as attachment. And attachment is a good translation, but what does it mean to say you're attached to someone or something? We understand what attachment means, but it might be helpful to use another term, emotional dependence. Attachment is a great word, but what is that attachment? Emotional dependence. Emotional dependence means to be dependent on someone or something for your contentment and inner peace. That is asakti, emotional dependence, attachment. And that asakti, that attachment, is to bahya anitya sukha. That attachment is to sukha, pleasures, which are bahya, external, and anitya, temporary. So the problem is asakti, attachment, emotional dependence, on sukha, pleasures, which are bahya, external, and anitya, transient, temporary. That's the problem. The enlightened person is one who hitva, the one who gives up, avoids, transcends that emotional dependence, becomes free from that emotional dependence. So hitva, becoming free from that emotional dependence on external sources of happiness and contentment. What does that person, the enlightened person, do? The enlightened person, end of the second line, becomes nirvritaha, not nivrita. These two words are so different. Nivrita means withdrawn. That's not the word here. The word is not nivrita, the word is nirvrita, and they have almost opposite meanings. Nirvrita, withdrawn. Nivrita, withdrawn. Nirvrita, fulfilled. Don't mix up these words. Nivrita, withdrawn. Nirvrita, fulfilled. So this enlightened person, having given up emotional dependence, attachment on external things, the enlightened person becomes nirvrita, fulfilled. Fulfilled with what? Atma sukha. Notice the contrast, Atma sukha, the happiness, which is Atma, which is your true nature. Look at the contrast between, in the first line, bahya anitya sukha, happiness which is external and transient, versus Atma sukha. Sukha, pleasure, which is Atma, your own true nature as Ananda. So this is, in 2 verses back, we talked about that shift. So here we're talking that shift, that same kind of shift is being described here, whereas initially one is dependent on external temporary sources of contentment and peace, that gets shifted for the enlightened person to being fulfilled not with external temporary sources, but with an internal permanent source of happiness, contentment, and peace. That source, of course, being Atma. And with that Atma, the enlightened person is nirvrittaha, fulfilled, content. And another metaphor comes. The enlightened person is gatastha deepavat swastaha. The enlightened person is swastaha. Literally self-established, but what does that mean? Means content with yourself. Swastaha, content with yourself, comfortable. There's an American English expression, comfortable in your own skin. I don't know how applicable that is here, but comfortable as you are, without needing to change anything, without needing anything to change. You are content, fulfilled exactly as you are. Why? Because the problems of your body, mind, and senses don't affect you, and your true nature is Satchidananda Atma, full and complete, that so-called inner divinity. Therefore, the enlightened person, knowing that, is swastaha, established in oneself, like gatastha deepavat, like a deepa, like a lamp, which is gatastha, inside a pot. And the idea is inside a closed vessel. Imagine a shining lamp inside a closed vessel. That shining lamp illumines itself and the interior of that closed vessel. The shining lamp doesn't need another lamp to illumine it. A lamp illumines itself. It's self-shining. You don't need another light to illumine that lamp shining inside the pot, because that light is self-shining. But now here's the trick. From outside, you can't see the lamp shining inside. This is a metaphor. If you are outside looking at the pot, you can't tell if there's a lamp inside of it or not. What does that metaphor represent? When you look at an enlightened person, how can you tell whether they're enlightened or not? Do they somehow glow in the dark? There's a joke I make with children. Does an enlightened person glow in the dark? Children like that joke. How do you tell? The truth is, you can't tell just by looking at someone whether they're enlightened or not. That shining, if we use that expression, is inside. It's not visible from the outside. So this is a metaphor. That lamp of wisdom shines inside the enlightened person and is not visible to anyone outside. Just like that lamp inside the pot. Gatastha deepavat. Just like a shining lamp placed inside a pot, a closed vessel. No one outside can see that lamp shine, but it shines. In the same way, from that light of wisdom shines inside the enlightened person, but no one outside can see. You can't see, you can't tell who's enlightened. But swantareva prakashate. Prakashate. It shines. Swantar eva. Swantar, in oneself. Eva, alone. It shines within oneself alone. And that eva here, meaning alone, the sense is the only person who knows the enlightened one is one who's enlightened. From the outside, you can't tell. But to the enlightened person, to the Jivan Mukta, that's our word, the Jivan Mukta knows himself or herself to be totally free from suffering. You can't tell that from the outside. But for the enlightened person, it is so absolutely vivid and clear, just like that lamp, a shining lamp, just shines. You can't but see a shining lamp unless it's hidden inside a pot. For the enlightened person, it's not hidden. For an enlightened person, it is inside the mind, inside the heart, so to speak. Therefore, swantareva prakashate, that lamp of wisdom shines within. Beautiful. Okay, nice place. We'll stop here. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhaveta, asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.